Just a couple of other things before we get going. Just two things. Firstly, thanks to Screen Australia for their support in helping these AWG webinars eventuate. And the other thing is just a reminder to our members that the On Air initiative, AWG is partnering up with Audible to develop an original drama, audio drama series. I don't know if it's limited to drama, but you know, it's open to student members, associate members, and full members as well. So that closes on Monday. So do make sure you get your entries in plenty of time. All right, well, on to the chat proper, even though we started before. I'm super chuffed to have Catherine Smythe McMullen, or Catherine McMullen, Catherine S. McMullen, and I'll get to all those, those names in a second. Yes, I've run into Catherine a few times. We chat every now and then over Messenger, but it is lovely to sit down and have a proper natter about life, the universe, and everything, especially to do with writing and your wonderful achievements that we've celebrated before in a room. You weren't there, thank you, but your dad was, so, and he did a great.
Oh yeah, the John Hind, yeah.
John Hind Award.
Yeah.
And especially your achievements over the past 12 months, which are nothing to be sneezed at. And so, yes, in what quick way of introduction, I'm sure you have all read the bio, otherwise, or you've heard of Catherine before, otherwise why are you here? Catherine had her debut feature, The Other Lamb, premiere at TIFF last year, and then was released in the US this year by IFC Midnight. And we'll have a look at the trailer a little bit later. I'm going to experiment and try and play that. Everyone who hasn't seen it can sort of like get the vibe of the film. And she's also worked for the CW and Netflix in the US for the Two Sentence Horror Stories show. And she's got a bunch of things she's working on at the moment, some of which she cannot talk about, others which she can. So we won't talk about the things you can't talk about, because who wants dead air and me begging? So yes, welcome, Catherine. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank
you. So look, I'll skip straight into some questionings proper. I was just going to ask you about, because I have known you by so many different names, and have you settled into one? You are the Snoop Dogg of writing.
Well, I have a very long name. Actually, I have 5 names. So Catherine Frances Inez Smythe McMullen is my full name. And very early on in my writing career, I decided to go by C.S. McMullen, as it was shorter. And my dad is a writer, and so his last name is McMullen. And it's kind of morphed into, sometimes it's Catherine S. McMullen, sometimes it's C.S. My friends would normally call me by my full name. It's all fine. It's just, I've got a lot of variants.
You didn't consider being C. Shayne McMullen, just so you could sort of like...
No. So the S is for Smythe. So I keep my mum's name in there. That's very important to me.
Right. Well, we were talking just before we joined everyone else about to do with your heritage and your genealogy. And, we were chatting the other night about Australia's being a fairly new modern nation, an old nation in terms of the Indigenous population, but as far as the nation of Australia, fairly new. That we don't have centuries or thousands of years of the European folkloric tradition and myth to draw upon. Our mythology as Australia is fairly new. We're still probably developing it. But you have, it's in your genes, and it's in your family. And we were talking that my family is storytellers, but verbal storytellers, and because they're largely Irish and Italian, they do have this sort of fascination with spirituality, superstition, all that kind of stuff. And as we mentioned, or I don't know if we did mention it, but your dad Shayne is a very well-known science fiction and fantasy author. And a super nice man, and not just saying that because I know that he's got a black belt in martial arts. And
fencing.
So very nice man. And in fact, I'm looking at one of his novels sitting next to the bust of Frankenstein. So I hope he finds that a right place. So you presumably grew up surrounded by, you know, not just a writer, but writing books. You did say your mum was a librarian at one stage as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I feel very lucky in that it's always been very clear to me that I want to be a writer. I struggled with how I would do that and make money, but I probably was saying I wanted to be a writer from around the age of 6. My dad's a science fiction writer, as you mentioned, and my mum's a librarian. So she would bring home piles and piles of books, and I would just chew through them because I was an only child and I didn't have any friends. So I just read. And then,
you ever late in returning books?
What was that? Sorry.
Were you ever late in returning the books? Did your mum give you fines or anything? Or?
Well, no. I mean, you don't always get fines if you.
The librarian's daughter.
But I mean, I read them really quickly anyway, so probably shouldn't tell myself there. Yeah, so I think, but the real thing was, you know, I was at science fiction conventions. I was always watching nerdy films. I think I watched Alien when I was 8. You know, Terminator 2 is the film I've probably seen the most times. I very much grew up with genre as something that I always focused on. And then that, you know, has led to certain choices in my career where it's like, well, if you're only a genre writer in Australia, it's going to be tough. Just, you know, not impossible, but it's a small market. So that's really has informed a lot of my choices to work both here and overseas and all of that. But there was never any, you know, I've never thought, oh, that'd be a great cop show. Like if I do think that it's if the cops are vampires or, you know, it always has to have that. For something I'm writing myself, there always has to be that genre element really for me to be interested in it.
Yeah, I think
I like very weird stuff. So there's that too.
I think in certain families it's a disappointment if their child is a nerd, but, you know, it would have been a cause for celebration, wouldn't it?
If I'd become a banker, I think my mum and dad would have both like completely disowned me. This is not a rebellion at all.
I try my hardest to make my kids, you know, nerdy. You know, you know, it's an act of will. So, you know, congratulations to the entire family for raising a fine and successful nerd. It may happen to many more families. Yeah, in your decision to become a writer, I mean, you said quite young, you decided that's what you wanted to be, or you're compelled to be one. What steps did you take other than writing? Which I'm assuming I'm just going to guess that you were one of the kind of kids that, you know, loved writing at school. You might have written after school or on weekends for fun. What steps did you take beyond just writing to become a writer?
So a big thing for me was I entered in little, you know, kids competitions. The very, very first thing I was ever published in was kind of a little anthology series of stories written by children. I then had a few things published fairly young, which was both a blessing and a curse because it kind of set this impossible goal for myself. And then for many years I wrote, but often through school, and I kind of found I had a very stressful year 11 and 12, and a lot of my energy was taken up doing that. And then a few years later, I would have been kind of my, I was working at Matchbox. I started to write short stories again. And one of those was actually The Other Lamb. So it wasn't my first short story I'd written in years. It was, I think, the second, but it ended up being, you know, that was what I then adapted into a film and all of that. So yeah, short stories were kind of my gateway drug back into writing again.
Okay. Was there a point at which you thought maybe early on your plan was to be a novelist or a short story writer or a prose writer primarily, but then you kind of, I'm obviously had a love of film growing up. And then
I had a love of film, but I think, you know, all of the conventions I went to and all of the people I met were always authors. So I definitely, in my head, a novel was in my future, not writing TV or film. That changed for me when it's very clear, it changed for me when I watched Buffy. I watched Buffy on TV and was like, whoever made this happen in front of my eyeballs, I would like to do that one day. And then I started to, you know, look into what screenwriting actually was like and what I did. Years later, I applied to the VCA, but my application was rejected because it was late. So that says a fair bit about me. But I ended up kind of coming into it through the production side. So I worked in production and then would write on the side while I was doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if it makes you feel better, I was rejected from film school too because my application was awful.
Similar.
Well, I showed them out. They made a career out of writing awful things.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Yeah.
With your prose writing, was that challenging to evolve to screenwriting? Because I know a lot of people that are brought up habitually or train themselves in prose find the transition to the more surface level writing, not of depth.
It's really hard.
We see it's visual. It's what we see or what we hear. There's no narrator. There's no monologue of the characters unless it's that kind of film.
I mean, I think it was a hard transition. I think the main thing was I hadn't really bedded down in prose that much. I'd written a few short stories. They'd done relatively well, but then I started to work in film and TV. And I think the key thing is that you tend to think in what you're consuming. So if I sat down and was reading 100 short stories, I would probably start to think in short story terms again, because that was what I was doing. I was reading short stories all the time. So I would have a cool little idea and go, oh, that could be a cool short story. Whereas now, because I'm working in film and TV, I tend to think, oh, that could be a cool pilot, or maybe that's a feature. Like, I think what you're consuming, including scripts compared to watching things, changes how your brain kind of approaches ideas and opportunities. Some ideas are short stories, some ideas are TV shows, but, you know, I think what you kind of open your creative self up to is often dictated by what you're consuming. So, you know, if I was watching a lot of cop shows, maybe I would start to think about a cool cop show, but I will never do that. So.
And sorry, I've just been distracted by my cat at the door, so that's why I try to get through that
here as well. They can be the guest stars later.
Sorry, any formal training? Did you actually do any courses, or you read a lot of scripts, or you read books on screenwriting? What was the?
I technically did. I went on 1-year exchange to UCSB, which is a Californian university, and when I got there, I lied. So I told them that I was doing a film studies degree, whereas what I was actually doing was an arts degree, like studying film. So they thought I was doing a degree where you held a camera and talked to actors and whatever. And I was not doing that degree. I was doing the kind of degree where you talk about Schindler's List and The Color Red. And then so for a year when I studied there, I just studied all their film studies subjects. So I did an intro to screenwriting class and kind of a adaptions class, and I think there was one other thing, but they were very much like at a basic surface level. But, you know, they did look at, here's a scene, here's how you do scene headings and structure. So it did cover that, but that was the end of it. And then because I'd spent that year studying film, I then had to go back to Melbourne and do 2 years of law, which hurt, but I think was worth it in the long run.
Right. And do you think the large part of your training that was informal, you know, it's those formative years of just being a reader, a voracious reader, of soaking up the written word, and I guess you internalize structure, you know?
Yeah, I think that I've been told that my scripts, that you can tell that I used to write in prose. And I always think, you know, even if it's not something you're going to see on screen, I want my script to read well. Obviously, it's different when it's in production and you've had to cut scenes and there's money. That's a different thing. But when you're sending a sample out, you know, I don't think any action line, like, yes, you know, you can't go into 5 sentences about what a character's thinking internally. That's going to be really hard to show on screen. But there's no reason for you not to have fun in the action lines and the prose and actually make it something interesting for people to read, which I think does come from my prose background. I want people to look at a sentence and be like, what a nice sentence, whereas that's not always the case for screenwriters, because it's a blueprint. You're not actually, no one will ever read it that isn't a development executive, realistically. So
I think you're right, though. I mean, it's a joy. And when you read good big print, you know, dynamic big print, something that kicks a little bit, it's not just functional. Someone can write great dialogue. I know there are plenty of great writers that have excellent dialogue skills, and their prose is, their big print is a little bit more functional. But I personally, I guess it's because of my background as a reader as well. You know, I like it when there's a kick in the big print. And my first exposure to your work was many years ago. Well, everything's a few years ago. I can't tell what's many years ago. I know.
Time is
I
so cool.
remember reading a pilot of yours on the train, and was it called Awake? Was that yours?
Yeah, the sleeping one
The sleeping
or
one?
the robot one?
No, the sleeping one. What was
Sleeping
that?
one, yeah.
Was that called Awake?
Awake, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. All right, got it. So it's a few years old, and I remember,
Yeah.
remember the title. So evocative title, good, memorable title.
Yeah.
That was good. But and I didn't know you'd read it because it was a blind read. Sorry, I didn't know you'd written it, and I didn't know you. I didn't know who had written it, and straight away the big print jumped. There was a kind of an electricity. There was an attitude to it, and I remember thinking at the time, there was something like, it was a little bit sort of, it was like a darker, grittier, Joss Whedon-esque kind of feel to it. And I don't know whether
Those are the nicest things anyone's ever said to me.
Yeah, it was, and because, there was a humor, and there's a strong, intelligent female lead that wasn't afraid to swear and drink, and there was kind of a grittiness to it, and it really just popped on the page, and I've always remembered that project. Where is that one at the moment? Is that one of the projects you've got in development, or is that something you can't talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, semi. It's been sold to someone in the States, so I don't know if I can say who, but yeah, it's
Okay.
in development, as they say, I guess.
Can you just tell people who are watching kind of what the basic premise is without pitching it?
Yeah, so really fundamentally, it's a world where a very small percentage of the population doesn't have to sleep. So they just have to sleep once a week. And although on the surface, it's kind of dealing with questions of, technology and all of those things, what I'm really trying to look at is class and time. Fundamentally, time is actually the biggest limitation for people. If you have a job where you have to take the bus for 3 hours, that's 3 hours every day that you don't have to spend doing other things and to study or to get a better job. And so you kind of get caught in that grind. And it was kind of trying to look at that and go, well, what would happen if an entire subset of the population didn't have to sleep? How would you ever catch up to them? If we both had the same job and I had an extra 8 hours a day than you, realistically, I'd get promoted before you, I'd get more opportunities. So even though I think that's kind of a core of my work, especially when I'm working within science fiction, but and fantasy as well, I guess, you do have to have a really strong genre premise. That's really important. You have to have the hooky thing that people read and are excited by, but you also have to have something deeper that you want to say with it, something that you're exploring. That pilot would have been really fucking boring if it had just been, wouldn't it be cool if you didn't have to sleep? Like that, I don't know what that would have been about. Whereas with that kind of at its core, thinking about our relationship with work and our relationship with time, and I'm also have had insomnia on and off for a lot of my life. So it, sleep and me I once sprained my neck sleeping. So I haven't always had a great relationship with sleep. And you have to have something you want to say with your genre. You can't just go, oh, it's super cool, there's robots. Like you have to be trying to say something deeper.
Yeah. And genre is that sort of, it's education or enlightenment by stealth, rather than when something tries to spoon feed you or just shove it down your throat to teach you the lesson. It's kind of like, when I was a kid, that you might, maybe dad let you watch He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. After 20 minutes there'd be a moral at the end where He-Man would come on and tell you the reason why you just watched 20 minutes of animation. And I as a kid, you felt that was being shoved down your throat, and I don't like that when I'm getting that in a piece of
something like Twilight Zone, that always had a moral, but the moral was often just that people were awful, which I was kind of okay with.
Yeah. And then there were some strange ones where they didn't really deserve it, and they seemed a bit cruel, those ones. But anyway, maybe Rod Serling was having a bad day that day. He had bad experiences, so he had a tainted view of humanity. And I'm a big fan of the original Planet of the Apes, and I like the new ones as well. But for that, which Rod Serling did a draft of course, and that film about apes riding around on horseback says more about humanity and philosophy and the way we treat each other and the planet and the role of religion and the suppression of science and knowledge, in 90 minutes, and you still get to see, a talking
cool apes
riding around. Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can be entertaining.
Win-win. Yeah.
That's right. For bikinis, I think she was the producer's girlfriend as well, wife. I'm just looking at a picture of her now, actually. Yes, let's talk a little bit about The Other Lamb. Before we get into that, I might just show the trailer, and this is a bit of an experiment because I haven't checked.
Horrible at watching their own work.
Let's hope this works.
There once was a woman, made of moonlight and teeth. She would roam in the woods, searching for something, hunting.
And he just kept telling me, you are perfect. You are accepted.
Oh, my shepherd, I need a deeper experience with you than I ever had before.
So beautiful, just like your mother's.
Come down upon me and fill me with yourself.
Let us pray. My wives, you all came to me broken by a cruel world. I took every one of you in. I sacrificed my life for you. I gave you daughters and sisterhood and life. Let us reflect on our blessings.
Yes, my shepherd.
You think that because you haven't had your time yet, that makes you special. Prepare yourself, child. Our great shepherd won't be so sweet on you then. I'll be seeing you when the blood comes to you.
As I went down in the valley to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear the starry crown? Good Lord, show me the way.
Shala, what happened?
Oh, sisters, let's go down.
It's worse than punishment.
Let's go down, come on down. Oh, sisters, let's go down.
I am relying on you, Zella. Of all my children, you're the purest in your faith.
And what I love about that trailer is that it gives the tone of the film away, the atmosphere, but it doesn't give you the plot. I really like that. I miss those days. I rarely watch trailers now because, you get most of the film in the trailer, but yeah, that's excellent. Now, you said Awake was sort of inspired by your own battles with insomnia. I dread to ask, what was the inspiration for that time you were in a cult?
Yeah. So for me, it was a combination of things, but I guess the inspiration for the short story and then the film are obviously what inspired the short story and inspired the film. But I've always been relatively obsessed with cults. I would watch and kind of seek out any documentaries I could on them, and specifically why people would join cults generally around a charismatic man that on paper looked not great, didn't necessarily look like someone that you want to chain yourself to for the rest of your life. And then I watched a really interesting documentary called, in particular, I think it was The Family at the End of the World. It's a PBS one. It was not that well known. And it ended up being a key reference to the film. I sent it to the director. She showed it to all the actors. So it really helped get us all on the same page. But fundamentally, I kind of realized that just looking at them as a negative thing, obviously, I'm not sure there's a huge difference between cults and religion, but there are obvious reasons why one joins one, charismatic man, all of that stuff. But this documentary in particular, it focused on the women a lot more. And I kind of realized that the man was almost irrelevant. There would always be a different version of him. You could swap them out and it doesn't really matter. But why people are drawn to these things and what in them is kind of broken that makes you decide to kind of give up all control over someone like that was what interested me. And then on top of that, people being born within those things. So same as someone being born within a super orthodox family of some kind or a super atheist family, it's what you're raised with and then what you then start to question. So I really wanted to do it from the perspective of someone for whom this is her entire world. She's never known anything else. And then she slowly starts to realize that the world is not as she was taught.
Okay, interesting. So you don't have the convention of the fresh eyes going into the cult, or a stranger that is exposed to it. That's an interesting perspective. Usually you see it from the point of view of an escapee from the cult coming into an ordinary family.
Yeah, a new person or a new person joining.
Yeah, or a new person joining. Wow.
Yes, someone described it in one of the reviews as a cult in decline, and I really liked that, because you often see cults when it's like everything's shiny and new and you can see why they join, but this is like, this started 10, 15 years ago. It's not as shiny anymore, but it's now all you've known for too long. So, yeah.
And I wonder also, is it because it originated as a short story, and short stories by nature, you're in deep into the narrative quite often. You don't start at the beginning quite often. You sort of start in media res with a short story. So what were the challenges then of expanding your short story to a feature? I mean, what was it? What were the elements that you thought, well, that could be extrapolated into a feature from the short?
Yeah, it wasn't, I didn't have to cut much plot or expand it out really. It was very, the key dramatic moments, which are, you're in the middle of a cult, there's a traumatic kind of semi-supernatural event, and then they decide to leave where they are and go on a journey. Those were all very much in the short story. I think the main thing was that, it's that movement from internal to external. So there were lots of internal struggles that my character went through that you could just understand, because you could read about them and she would think, oh no, what if this happens? And you don't get to do that in a feature. So a lot of it was about making internal movements for a character's arc, external movements for a character's arc. And I think whether or not it's adapting someone else's work or your own work, I think generally prose to film, that's almost always what you're battling with in some way.
Before I get on to talking about the journey of the script from script to screen, because I think that's interesting, I just want to ask you, because it's such a creepy trailer, and I'm just going to assume it's a creepy film, and I've read quite a few reviews that say it is. Are you kind of a method writer? Do you feel that a scene is scary or creepy or uneasy when you're feeling that yourself as your writer? Is that the way you approach it?
Yeah. Look, normally I wouldn't describe myself that way. Normally I'm much more I try and write it and then put it aside, and I can be writing something quite disturbing and then it's fine, it's not in my head. I think with The Other Lamb, I probably did go as method as I've ever gone, which is I would watch kind of really weird cult things and then write quite late into the night and then wake up and do it again. And I probably did get into a weird headspace about it. But that's the only film of mine where I have done that. So I listen to the Jonestown tapes and things where I think in retrospect, not something to listen to at 3 a.m.
They're not a good, easy listening choice.
No.
Yeah, they're still disturbing. I mean, decades on, removed the content.
No, they're still deeply disturbing. So I think, I am not normally a fan of people that are like, oh, I have to go full method to write a thing. And I haven't done it, as I say, for any of my other scripts really. But with this one, I did kind of go into a fairly interesting headspace to kind of capture what it felt like to be in that kind of a group.
And it seems to have paid off. Well, I want you to now step us through, if you could, the journey of The Other Lamb from script to screen, because of course it made it onto the blacklist, the hit list, and the blood list, which is the horror specific version.
The horror variant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did it get into those pools, and then how did it get out of the pool and onto the screen? What was the process there?
So it's funny because that stuff's often a little backwards in terms of there's what's happening behind the scenes and then there's what is announced and what's going on. So I won an award from the International Emmys, I think near the end of 2016, and that kind of triggered a trip to New York to accept it. And then from there, I ended up getting management in America, and I was very, very lucky. I have some amazing managers that also work across Australia and the States, so they don't view it as a either or, which is often very uncommon with the Americans. And then from there, I just started going out and doing generals. So the things where, they call it the water bottle tour, but it was a sample. I went out and I sent my script as a sample to lots of people, or I didn't, my managers did. And then I would go and meet them. 99.9% of them, you're meeting with them and they go, great sample, we have this other show, or we have this thing, or do you have anything else? Like it's not for it to be made. And then I met with my producers at Rumble, and they I walked in and I thought it was a general, and my producer Stephanie, who's amazing, was like, oh, and is the rights to this free? And that was kind of started the conversation. So, and it was a very fast process. So that was in, I think, February. And then the day we started shooting last year, just by coincidence, Steph posted on Instagram that it was 2 years to the day from when she read the script for the first time. So for a feature film, that is incredibly fast. And I'm very aware that I've had a very blessed run with it, in terms of from someone reading it to it being shot to it coming out is very rarely that quick.
And not just blessed that it's had such a great reception as well. I mean, that's something everyone sweats upon. It's kind of what are people going to think of it? What are critics going to think of it? What are people in the audience going to think of it?
Yeah.
So was it a great relief when you started to see the reviews coming in?
Yeah, I think everything was better after TIFF. So when it aired at TIFF and it got a good review in the Hollywood Reporter, all the reviews after that were good or bad or whatever, I read and absorb, and that's fine, although I try to avoid them. But that very, very first one where it came out and they were like, we liked it, that was definitely, I mean, I felt like I was going to throw up when I was watching that screening. Like it was not a comfortable time for me. But yeah, no, so my point before about the blood list and blacklist is that, so everyone that you meet with and you have a general with and that reads the script, then at the end of the year they vote on the blacklist in particular. And so it was that weird thing where it had already been optioned, and most of the scripts on the blacklist have actually already been optioned generally. But then after that, it certainly meant that I got a lot of work after that, because if you write an Australian show, they respect that you're a working writer, but they don't necessarily know our credits or what that means, whereas they know what an American credit is, or one of the lists, or they know where to place you, which I think is the key thing.
Yeah. Had you known the work of, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of the director, it's
Małgorzata Szymanska.
That's what I was
my closest approximation.
Were you familiar with her work before you?
I had watched her film Body, that was had played at MIFF the previous year, I think. I wasn't hugely familiar with the rest of her work. She's not specifically a genre person. This was her first English language film, and also kind of her first genre film, although she'd had elements of genre in some of her others. But she's kind of much more a European art house director that had done a lot of films in Poland and incredibly experienced. So it was very exciting to be part of her first jump to doing English language things.
And of course, once something moves from script into active development for production, there's the notes. So, I mean, what kind of things came your way that were surprising, or did it change very much?
Yeah, so it was set in Australia, and I don't know if you noticed, but the trailer is not set in Australia. It was all red desert and red sand, and I guess both countries have sheep. So that was the biggest change, and that was from the very first meeting with the producers. They were like, we like it, but we have relationships in Europe, and we'd be looking at Ireland. And it was very, very fortuitous, because if they had said a different country, I would have, I think, struggled a bit more. But I also have an Irish passport, so when they said Ireland, I was like, okay, Ireland I can do. Like I can work that out. I can change it so they're isolated in a different way, and it's not the desert or a sheep station. It's this. So yeah.
Did you use Ireland to soak it up, or do any writing while you were there? Or
no. So I went to Ireland when we shot. So I was there for the first couple of weeks, but I didn't. I mean, I was just like, there was also a lot of questions, and in the film, it's meant to be deliberately vague, but it wasn't necessarily set in Ireland, so I didn't need to go there to like do research or do anything like that. It was much more just, okay, here I was sent all the location pictures of what they'd been looking at, and then I kind of wrote to those. So we found that beautiful campsite that was like an abandoned Christian summer camp, I think. We found that and dressed it, but I wrote to that. So it was a sheep station before that, and then like kind of a self-sufficient farm, and then I adapted everything to suit that new location. So Yeah, I mean, I think that was something where my experience in production certainly helped, because I know what things are important to me when I'm telling a story and what to put my foot down about, where I'm like, if someone said, oh, let's make half the cast dudes, I probably would have had more of an issue. Whereas changing location, I was like, well, this isn't a fundamentally Australian story. This is a story about isolation and faith and moving past where you grew up. And that's not, that doesn't have to be in Australia. So I knew where to bend, because to be really blunt, if I'd gone, no, I'm not resetting it, my film probably wouldn't have been made. So you have to know when to take some notes, and you have to know on the notes that you're like, actually, that's really important to me.
Yeah, it's a big challenge for any writer, that particular phase of things, you know.
Yeah.
So after having your first feature made, tick, done that, and then you started to work over in the States in TV as well with some development. And then, as I said before, you were working on 2-sentence horror stories for the CW and
Yeah.
Easy partnership or uneasy partnership, seeing that, you know, CW's often seen as, you know, quite you know, teeny kind of feel. Yeah.
So it was interesting. We developed it before it had sold to the CW. So it was a shorter sequence of episodes that were done for a digital platform. And then it was being adapted by the studio, which was Warner Brothers, into a longer form thing. So we didn't write with the CW in mind necessarily. And then, I mean, I professionally, I found that one of the most creative and rewarding experiences of my life. There was this incredible writer's room of people that were all just at the top of their game. And we just wrote some really weird, subversive, dark stories. So they're 22-minute, a single anthology. So every story is unconnected. The ones I ended up writing were ones I had pitched and kind of forced the showrunner to like in the room. She liked them, but some of them, not all my ideas got through, let's put it that way. But one of them's a makeup tutorial, and I literally was like, it's going to be like this, because I'd been watching a bunch of YouTube tutorials. So I think they're all just scared of it. But yeah, that really, it was a non-standard US writers' room. 3 or 4 writers all up is very small for an American room, but it was definitely kind of, it felt a bit like it was half an Australian room, half an American room for me, in terms of it wasn't immediately going into one of the ones where, you know, there's 15 people and it's for 20 weeks. It was quite a short room, but also incredibly, incredibly rewarding.
Yeah. And how do you find that experience of the writer's room, especially with Americans? I mean, an Australian writer's room is very chatty and loquacious, and people talking over each other and trying to get the ideas across. And, you know, I would imagine it'd be times 10 in an American writer's room.
Yeah, I think the strange thing with Australia is that there's no formal hierarchy, but there is a hierarchy. So, you know, if you walk into a room and there's someone that's got 20 years experience and someone that's got 2, you're both technically writers on paper, but there is a hierarchy there. But then if the person with 2 years experience has more experience in what that show is exploring, then maybe the hierarchy changes. So whereas in the States, you have titles, you know where you land, you know what you are, for better or for worse. And it's not a thing where someone will pull out the title and be like, you have to talk less because this, but they are bigger rooms, so there is just less air. So, you know, I don't think I've ever been in an Australian room with more than 8 people in it, including, you know, the interns, the note takers and all of that kind of stuff. Whereas you can get quite big in some American rooms. I think the main thing is that it's kind of how long is a piece of string. Each room is so different. Even in the 2 I've been in, they've been completely different in some ways, completely the same in others. I think the main thing is that, you know, you have to learn to read the room properly, and we do have different cultural cues to the Americans. So that certainly took me, you know, we pitch slightly differently. We're a little bit more conversational. There's not a formal pitch as much. And so I had to adjust my style a little bit more to that. And also it's just longer. Like, it's so different when you're in a room for 10 or 20 weeks. It's just so different. You know, and 10 weeks is considered a short room, whereas here, obviously, you're doing a week or 2 and then a break, and then maybe 3 weeks and a break. And it's a very different model.
Very intense. And then one more question for me before we open it up to the participants. That sounds so general, but the participants. We were having a bit of a chat the other night about the changing landscape in Australia, the slow transition to the acceptance of genre or making more pure genre TV. You know, we do have television shows that have elements of genre within it, but you know, we probably haven't got that pure show. Not in adult, you know, kids. We've been doing kids sci-fi for a long time, kids fantasy for a long time.
Spellbinder and Ocean Girl and all those things.
Of course, yeah. And are you finding that yourself when you're talking to companies in Australia? There is a kind of it's not begrudging either. I mean, people know people are voracious for horror and sci-fi and fantasy. We just haven't made that transition in the country yet. You're finding that change is coming?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of, obviously no one calls me up to ask for a show about non-genre things, so I'm probably got a little bit of a bias, but certainly the streamers coming in and, you know, they can make things here cheaper than they can in other countries in some cases. And I think there's two types of genre production that I think we'll start to explore. And one of them is the one where it's purely Australia is almost a production service location. So you have something shot here, but the writers are American, the showrunner's American, and they fly in. And I think we'll see an increase in that because of COVID. And then there's the kind that you're talking about, which I also hope is going to increase, but is much more about, you know, it's written in Australia, it's filmed in Australia, but it's for a worldwide audience. And I think that is where it is changing, because, you know, you don't tend to write across any genre. You don't tend to write just for the domestic market anymore. So you have to write things that, like Miss Fisher's murder mysteries or what have you, that will hopefully travel internationally. And with that in mind, I think genre, I mean, I think it's 43% of Netflix's slate. Like you don't say, oh, it's a show about Germany, but there's time travel. You say it's a time travel show set in Germany, you know, like that's how you sell the genre first and location second. So there has been an uptick, at least as far as I'm concerned. But then also when I'm kind of talking in the States to people, I try and go, well, you know, if you've got me, there's Quape and there's this, and you can bring it back. And even if we, you know, wrote it there, it'd be this. So it's about trying to get American producers to understand how our system works, and also that we make really good stuff. So, and write really good stuff.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's almost like the flip side of Australia, where you pitch a drama and say, oh, by the way, there might be aliens in it, or there might be time travel. Yeah. Whereas
you lead with the genre.
Yeah, you don't. When you pitch in the States or the UK, it's kind of just, oh yeah, you know, great. Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for. You know, you know, horror isn't a dirty word, or science fiction's not a, you know, something you're going to bring out, you know, tremulously to pitch. I mean, I think
indie films here have done well, especially in the horror space, for a number of years. I think, but at TV, it's certainly often that the genre is, as you say, it's a drama but with a genre element, which is also fine. It's that still travels and it's valid, but like it's not full big world sci-fi building, or it's not really high concept stuff. So, or it can be, but it's kind of, it's partly budget and it's partly taste. So yeah.
Well, I'll open it up to people. We do have a chat question here. Kim asks, when you say sample, do you recommend not to send actual projects as opposed to samples to Blacklist or other competitions? I'm assuming you'd send the full script, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. So sample in this context means a script where you're sending it to someone and you're not going, please make my film. You're sending it to them going, I am a good writer. Here is a script that shows I'm a good writer. And I for context, I still use The Other Lamb as a sample. It's not something where, even though it's been made and all of that stuff, if someone wants to approach me or is interested in me doing a horror film, that's still something where I can send that to them, even though it's out, it's been made. So I think sample in that context just means like there's a difference between I've got a project out and it's going out to producers, so I hope they make it, versus here is a sample of my writing. I hope that you like me as a writer for other projects. And I just, you know, I'm sure there are a lot of aspiring or current screenwriters listening. For context, when I signed with my managers and landed in the States, I had 2 features and 2 pilots, all in relatively good shape. And I had 1 feature that was also kind of in the process of being written. So that was, it as opposed to having one really strong thing. And then when you turn up to the meeting, they're like, great, what else do you have? I kind of had dual samples from both things, because it's also, you'd go to meet with the film company and they would want TV, because it turned out they were transitioning to TV. So it's having a good sample packet that is kind of consistent, but different samples within whatever genre you want to write in is really important. And I'd say it's important in Australia as well. I think it's always important to have good examples of your writing.
And a good friend of mine and peer up here, Anthony Mullins, was doing a chat yesterday. So I do watch other people's Zoom chats. And he was saying that, it's 99% of the business is rejection. That is,
oh yeah,
the thing that you write isn't going to get made, or they might not like it. But as you say, it's a sample of you as a reader. Even if they might love the script, but it's just not what they can make it.
I think it's about moving your goalposts as well. So, a lot of people, like my script Living Metal was never made. It is my sci-fi pilot. That was my first kind of thing that started to break me through. And it's not a failure for me at all. It won me, I got nominated for a bunch of AWG things. It won me an award from the Emmys. That got me my managers. Technically, you could look at that and say it's a failure because my pilot didn't get made. But in reality, it kicked all of these goals for me. So I think, if you write a script and it gets you a job as a note taker on a show, that script has done what you wrote it for. Like you might still want to make it one day, and that's absolutely valid. But like The Other Lamb had actually won for me well before it got made. Getting on those lists got me other work. As a sample, it got me work. Even if it had never gotten made, I still would put that kind of in the win basket for me.
And if they can see that you're a great writer, they'll say, this one isn't for us, but send us anything you've got.
Other thing.
That might set it up.
Yeah.
Next question from Jason says, what's the most valuable thing or practice that you've done to help further your career?
It's very easy, Jason. It's a program called Freedom, and it blocks your internet. One day I will thank them on stage. It's the only way I write. I can't. I put my phone in another room and I turn on Freedom, and then I try and write a couple of pages. So it's that.
Have you ever heard of that? Apparently there's a software you can get that it's basically like a ticking clock, and if you don't write it,
Pomodoro.
What's it called?
Yeah. Well, the Pomodoro technique, which is 25 minutes on, 5 off. But there's I've tried a lot of them, but Freedom is it turns off your internet. That's
this one actually wipes your hard drive if you don't hit a number of.
Oh Jesus! Okay. I've done it. A version of that was I once bet a friend of mine. It wasn't a bet. It was every day I don't have this script into you, I have to pay you $5. And I think in the end I paid her $40 or $50. And I bought her a nice meal or something like that. But it was the really extreme version of that is for every day this isn't done, you donate to a political cause you don't believe in.
That's very
good motivation.
It's going to aversive conditioning. Chris says, hi, Catherine and Shayne. Would you recommend early career writers get their material read without, how do they get their material read without representation or industry contacts?
I mean, it's a really hard one. I know lots of people bag on competitions, but I had a lot of success with them in the sense of the AWG ones were great. I ended up making networks. I remember really clearly going to my first AWG event and literally knowing no one there. And now if I went to one, I would probably know maybe half the people in the room just through going to things. So going to events, talking to people, all that stuff. I did work in the industry, but everyone knew me as a production secretary or a PA, not as a screenwriter. But when I started to do work as a screenwriter, it helped that I was already friends with them on Facebook, or they already knew me, or all of that stuff. And then, I mean, it's going to things. It's if your script does well in something, whether it's an international one or not, and then you can send it to a producer and say, hey, it came in the top 50 of the Nichols, they probably will give it a read. I will say also that Australia is just a smaller market, so it really depends what kind of stuff you're writing. If you're writing American, you might be querying American managers or agents. If you're writing Australian things, it's going to be a smaller pool, and you'll probably meet those producers at events, which is a good and a bad thing. So, if Other Lamb had been made in Australia, there's probably 2 production companies that would have potentially made it, whereas there were many more options than that in the States, but also you have to have access to them, which is only through reps. So it can feel a little bit like a kind of a trap. You get read by getting reps, but you get reps by getting read. But you know, reps are on the lookout for talent. And as I say, mine noticed me. There's 2 of them there, and one of them was recommended to me because someone had seen I'd won a competition and thought we should meet. And then the other one in the company was recommended because a development executive had read my stuff and passed it along. Both of those, so they worked for the same company, had no idea they were both meeting with me. And I kind of view it as a sign of like, you start to get reps when your stuff is starting to get a little bit of heat behind you, basically. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, it's an interesting question here. What's your experience? This is from Olivia. What is your experience as a woman writing in a sci-fi horror genre? Do you have any trouble getting into the room because you're a female writer or because you're pitching for a female-led project?
Yeah, it's a great question, Olivia. They've all been great questions. I think it's shifted over the last 2 or 3 years. There's a real push now to make sure that rooms and also scripts have a little bit more diversity, both gender-wise and kind of ethnicity-wise and everything behind and in front of the camera. I would say not that many years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, there was 1 or 2 writers' rooms where I was the only woman, except for the note taker. Wasn't common, but it certainly happened, especially in the genre rooms. But that doesn't happen anymore. That's very rare for that to happen now. And I would be, if I walked into a room and I was the only woman, I'd be fairly confronted. But I definitely have a dance that I do at the start of meetings, which is basically before they can assume anything about me, I'm like, I'm a sci-fi and horror person. I grew up with it. I love these things. They are very much something I've always been interested in. So but I have to present myself that way because there's an assumption that I'm maybe interested in horror because it's the hot thing right now, or I'm interested in sci-fi because I watched Buffy that one time. And it's like, no, this is all I want to do. So I do feel like I have to lay down the law a little bit to executives up front, but that's happening less and less now. Certainly when I do generals, I have a little like minute or 2. Oh, and sci-fi is my whole thing, where I make sure that they know that this isn't just, a passing fad for me.
Great. Holly asks, hi, Catherine, thanks for sharing your time tonight. With the sample packet, 2 features and 2 pilot scripts, were you paid or self-funded to write them? Did you write them all for free?
Hi, Holly. I wrote them all for free while I was working on TV shows. So I worked on Childhood's End, Leftovers. I did a script internship at Wentworth. I worked on Hunters that Valhalla did. And whenever I had downtime in between projects, I'd try and write a script. It didn't always work out. One of them, The Other Lamb, was actually developed through Catapult. So there was no money, but we did a 5-day workshop, and then that helped me have a deadline for it. But all of my other scripts I just wrote. I used to joke about it, but it was kind of a dark joke that I meant, which was that I would write them and print them off. And then if I went into my backyard and burned them, the smoke signals would be as many people saw my script. And that was not completely inaccurate. I just thought I had cool ideas. And then when opportunity did knock, I kind of was ready and I had a packet of scripts. But in retrospect, I'm like, why did I just keep writing them with no? And it started to get little bits of feedback, like I'd been nominated in the Monty Millers and a few little things, but I wasn't working off that much in terms of, well, there was no money in it. So I was just working and writing.
Great. Jason says, what do you think horror or sci-fi stories can achieve that other genres can't?
So I think, like you were saying at the start, Shayne, and it's a great question, Jason, they can strip away, instead of, people often clam up when you give them a really direct analogy. So, if you say, this is about South Africa, and you're like, and this is what's wrong, and people go, oh, that makes me feel confronted. Whereas when you watch District 9, which is all about, it's in a very specific cultural space and a very specific time in terms of what it's trying to say about apartheid and all of those kind of things, but you're watching it through this sci-fi lens, so you don't clamp up as much. And then by the time the message is there and you're like, oh my God, how does this work? It's too late. You've already let it kind of absorb into you. That's what I think really great horror or sci-fi, Alien has some of the most incisive commentary about corporations and their place in modern life of anything. But that's not, you don't watch it going, I'm going to watch a thing about corporations and how bad they are. You watch it being like, cool alien that drips acid blood, like, which is great and is a really important part of it. But that's what I think I love trying to do with genre. And I think the best genre writers, there's always something in their work that is aiming to talk about something a little bit deeper or a little bit more universal, even though it can be really specific.
Very good. Got a question.
I think that might have been it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to be facetious and just say they make their budget back.
Yeah, or that too. Yeah. Horror you can make for not as much and make some money.
Kim asks again, a lot of US sites say to send spec scripts, but I've never written like that. Do you think spec scripts are important?
Yeah, so there's I think that might have to be the last question just because I think we're over time. But it's a bit confusing, Kim. Spec scripts can mean two things that are opposite. So a spec script can mean a speculative script that's an original script I write on my own, but it can also mean a speculative script for a current TV show. So, writing a spec script for It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. The current trends are much more to write original pilots. I don't know anyone that's there writing, a spec for a current TV show unless it's specifically for the TV fellowships. An original pilot will get you a lot more traction at the moment compared to going and writing, an episode of Dark or something like that.
That was good, and a good answer to finish off with. And we did have a couple of good questions in the chat window there. Should have instructed everyone to go to the Q&A function specifically, but that was fantastic to catch up with you and hear about.
Thank you. It was great.
Because I literally, as a fan of your work, I wanted to hear how it all came together. So we're not just sort of yelling across the room or stumbling anyway, trying to talk about it. Yeah. So thank you very much for your time tonight, Catherine. I really look forward to seeing what comes next. And we got through it without me getting too prying into the secret stuff that you can't talk about. So I'm proud of myself.
Yeah. It's very circumspect.
I'll quit before well, I'm ahead, I guess. So thank you very much. Great to see you. Say hi to your awesome dad for me.
Thank you.
I think he's watching. I think you might have said so.
He is. My dad and my mum are all here. That's why I didn't swear as much.
I'd met your dad before, so that's cool. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We'll be having another one before too long. And please, virtually in the privacy of your own home, a large round of applause or a thank you in chat to Catherine McMullen. Great to see you, Catherine.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the great questions.